All right, welcome to VMworld 2021 as well as Code Connect 2021. This is session code 2756. My name is David Stamen, a field solutions architect at Pure Storage, and today we're going to talk about how to build and publish a PowerShell module to the PowerShell gallery. This is something that I've done a lot in my time, and it's become useful when you have a task that might need to be repeatable, or there's a particular thing you want to do and a module doesn't already exist for it today. So before we get started, a little introduction about myself. I focus on our virtualization and our cloud solutions here at Pure Storage. Formerly, I was a technical marketing architect where I had the ability to travel all over the world and talk about vSphere lifecycle as well as vSphere Tanzu. I'm also currently a VMware vExpert, and I'm very happy to be a VMware code coach. I'm active on social media, so feel free to connect with me on Twitter, LinkedIn. I have some code examples up on GitHub, and you can also look at some of my blogs that I had on davidstamen.com. And so, kind of when we began, right, there was PowerShell modules, and they've been here for quite some time, but they've changed over time of how we use them. I remember way back, PowerCLI was one of the most basic PowerShell modules. In the past, in order to use these, you had to make sure that you had downloaded them by yourself, whether that was a zip file, you went to someone's website, you downloaded an exe and it installed these. But the hardest part about it is you just couldn't go to PowerShell and run these commandlets. It would always say, well, commandlet not found. What's important here is that over time, this is kind of adopted. But one of the most important things that you always had to do when you went to import this, right, is there was an import module. Or in some cases, right, you had to add the PowerShell snap-in, right? You had to import the individual modules because even though there really wasn't a concept of installation. And so over time, we've adopted this, right? In my mind, we can say the future has happened, right? As we think about the future, things should get simple, they should become more simplistic. And so, one of my favorite things here is that there's a gallery, right? You can browse a directory of modules that are out there, and it's very easy to just go ahead and install them, right? There's no longer a need to manually download those modules and import them. Use the PowerShell gallery, search for what you're looking for. In this case, VMware PowerCLI, right? You go to the PowerShell gallery, you search for it, and it comes up. You want to install it, right? You have internet access, install dash module, name, PowerCLI. You want to go ahead and build this into an Azure automation runtime. There is an installation option for that. Maybe you don't have internet access on the machine you're running to and you can't install it directly from the PowerShell gallery. Well, go here and do a manual download, and you can install the module in an offline format. My favorite part about this is that you no longer have to import the PowerShell modules. When you need a commandlet, they are automatically imported. And so a lot of times when you have PowerShell, right, we used to always do a get dash module. What modules do I have installed? Now, when you do that, nothing really shows up because they're only loaded when they're actually needed. And so, with the latest versions of PowerShell, there's now a get dash module space list available. Shows you what is currently installed and available to use. That's the best way to see what you actually have on your system. But the other thing happened, right? How do you know when there was an update available? You had to go to the vendor's website, you had to review someone's blog, you had to find some type of content out there, right? Linux always did something really good, right? apt-get update, apt-get upgrade. It automatically did all those updates for you. Well, PowerShell now does that, right? You do a get module, look at what's available. We can see the version here, right? We are running version 12.2. But hey, guess what? There is a version 12.3 available. You don't have to worry about manually downloading that and doing it, right? You can just do update dash module vmware.powercli. Put in the name of your commandlet. It is automatically going to update and install the latest version. Some might say this is a bug, some might say it's a feature, some might say it's useful, right? When you do that update, it's always going to leave the previous versions of those modules installed. And so if you need to use a specific version of code, well, you can do that. If you need to, and you want to clean up all those previous versions, you can go ahead and do a uninstall of that module, specify that previous version, and remove those previous remnants. Maybe there's a conflict, or maybe there's some underlying issue. It's useful to be able to do that. There's even some people that will go out there and there's some scripts that you can run that'll look at all of your modules with the list available, look if there's any duplicates, and then go out there and uninstall the latest versions. And so now that we kind of understand how the PowerShell gallery has improved us, right? Well, how do we actually get something there? And so the very first thing you have to think about is how do we build a PowerShell module? I kind of covered why you would do it, right? But it's really basic to create a module, right? Well, kind of have to decide a few things. Well, what do you want to do, right? You can create a module for many different things, but does it exist? Is there something that already does it? And so when I created a couple of my modules, right, I had one for vSphere with Tanzu. I created one for vSphere Lifecycle that would do vCenter server updates. I presented that at last year's CodeCon. And I've actually looked, there's almost over 2,000 downloads of that module. I'm amazed by that. But I found something that didn't exist. I found something that I needed. And so I wrote some code, I wrote a script, and you put it into a function. And so what a function is you first give it a name. The most important thing is you need to give it comments. A lot of this is how PowerShell reads it. This is how help files are built. There's a standard here, right? Who created it, what organization managed it. If you have any blog or Twitter, kind of just comments, right? Someone needs to find you and go from there. The next part is you put in your code, right? In this case, this was my old one where I was looking for VCSA update policy. I would check to see if you're connected to the integration service. I would then loop through all the servers that are connected to support multi-tenancy. I would then call a system update API. And so in this case, there wasn't a standard module, but the great thing is there was an API for it. And so I was able to get the results of that API and parse that in a way that was needed and then return that result. And so it was very simple, right? With this, you don't need to completely reinvent the wheel, right? This was something that someone had done with scripts. And so I learned that you can just do a get CIS service, look at the DCLI counterpart, pull it in, and then parse it out, right? I reused some existing code. I made it for what I needed to, and it was very simple, right? It probably took me 5 minutes to actually write this function. But what happens if you don't know what that actual code is that you need to use, right? VMware actually created two really great developer tools to be able to do this. And so one that they've had for a really long time, right? API Explorer. It used to be a separate user interface. It's now front and center in the developer tools in vCenter. And so it gives you the ability to browse what APIs are available, right? See the response type, see what's actually going to happen. You can actually execute the code, see what the result is, see where it actually lives. The best part is it gives you the actual curl commands. It gives you the actual wget commands, the code you actually need. And so from there, you have what you need to actually be done. But on the other hand, there's also another really great product. It's called Code Capture. Some of you may have known this as Onyx, the old Flash-based plugin that would allow you to run a task, and it would input or output all that information as code. And so they've made this a lot better. They've integrated it into the vSphere client HTML5 plugin, and you have the ability to start recording, run some tasks, stop recording, and it gives you all the code, right? It's going to give you the raw .NET code, but it's Power CLI. It also gives you the ability to export it into other formats. So maybe you want to do it in Python. It'll give you the Python. Maybe you want to do it, I believe it's in a couple other, Go maybe. It allows you to output that. Gives you that code that you can go out and automate that, put that into your function. And so when we think about this, right, there's a couple ways that you can actually write a module, right? There's actually three different types of module. The last one is kind of a subset of a module, right? And so you can create a module that contains scripts or functions. That's what we went over. It's the most basic form that we see out there. There's also a binary module, which contains compiled code, and it's based off a .NET framework. I'm not really aware of that many that are utilizing this. Maybe it's some custom, maybe it's some really complex code that you get to install and utilize it. And then there's also a dynamic one, right? I would maybe think of this as serverless, right? It's a special type of module that never really writes anything to disk, only writes in memory, so maybe it runs really fast. But most I've seen and utilized are always these script-based modules, and that's where we focused on this today. And so the next thing we have to think about is how do we define what's in that module, right? We wrote a bunch of functions, but how does it know what to actually do with those, right? Who created them? What is the versioning? What are the requirements? Stuff like that. And that is what the PowerShell module manifest does. It contains all the information about the module. And so when you think about a PowerShell module, right, there's going to be a PS D1, right? That is the PowerShell module. In this case, we create a manifest, right? In this case, it's the PSD one. Sorry, the module is the PSM one. The manifest is the PSD one. And so on the left, right, we see what this manifest is. A whole lot of information. What is the module that it contains? What is the version? What is the unique identifier, right? Who created it? From what company? How do they copyright it? What does it actually do from a description point of view? Are there any requirements, right? So in this case, this was my VCSA update one, and it actually required Power CLI. And so in this case, it has a required module Power CLI that when you go out and install it, it makes sure that Power CLI is also installed because it's dependent on it. But then you also look at what are these functions to export. And so by default, the module manifest doesn't really know what it does. If you install it, it's not going to parse those commands. And what the functions to export means is that it'll actually, when it installs, it'll export those functions. So when you do a get commandlet or a get command, it'll actually let you use those. And then again, there's some private data. This is what is actually used in the online gallery. Put some tags in there, allow people to search for it. Put in a project URI, right? The most important thing is about being open source, sharing your code. Here it is available on the community. If people want to be able to provide feedback, pull requests, raise issues, let them know where they actually need to go. And then if you want a pretty icon in the gallery, we'll put one, right? You can go out there and manually build this, but you really don't need to, right? Very simple. You can do this a couple different ways. From the most basic thing, you put a new dash module manifest, specify the path to your file, put in the version, the author, the bare requirements of what you actually need, and it automatically generates this file for you. Well, maybe you want to know, is it actually there? Did I complete it? Is it valid? Did I put in the right information? Well, you can go in there and do a test-module manifest, put in the path, and it'll tell you it's good. It'll allow you to update, right? I wrote in some code and it's like, you're missing this, right? I didn't put in the required. I didn't say if it was desktop or for core, or I put a typo in there. But what happens when you add something, right? What happens when you add a new function? What happens if you need to increment a version, right? You don't have to go in there and just manually modify the file. There's some other things that need to be done. And so luckily, Microsoft built in an update module manifest. And what this allows you to do is point to that file, increment the version, put in your name. It'll update and pull in all the things from that module that you might have done, right? You might have to add in some additional functions if that's what you added. If you added another require dependency, you'll add that in there. So it's very useful to be able to do that. And so now we've learned, well, why should we write one? How do we write one? But the next step is, how do we get it into that gallery? How can we allow people to search for it? How can we allow people to install it? Well, the very first thing we have to do is navigate to www.powershellgallery.com. And everything is done through authentication, right? And we use API keys. And so when you go to the PowerShell gallery, you'll log in the top right corner with your Microsoft account. And you'll create an API key and specify what is the key name so you know what it does, how long you want it to expire, right? This is a secret. This is giving people the ability to update items. And so within this, right, you're going to specify a scope. Do you want you to only be able to push an initial version of a package, or do you also want to be able to update packages? Do you want this user with this key the ability to remove previous versions or remove it, right? And so from a basic perspective, we need the ability to push it, and really only new if we're doing that initial upload. Well, once we're there, we've been using PowerShell for everything. Why not use it for more? Let's use PowerShell to publish that module or your script to the PowerShell gallery. And so there's a couple of ways to do this, right? If you have the module on your machine, you've maybe imported it manually, doing some testing to do it, you can just publish the module that way. What I found to be the easiest is by publishing the module utilizing the path, or publishing the script using the path. You'll specify publish dash module dash path, the script to the path, and then that new get API key is going to be that API key that we previously done. If you don't know it, you can click on there and it'll show you, right? The documentation is very good. You can just go to the My Packages. It tells you exactly once you're there. Once you're there, you can go to a machine and go ahead and do your install module, see it install, and use it. So now that we've learned how to write some code, how to build some code, and then how to publish some code, why don't we take a look at how we can actually put that in and actually do a demo, right? I think that's a really good way to kind of dive in and take a look at what we can do. So as we jump in, warning, it's demo time. Things might go good, things may not, but let's just see it live. All right, so now that we begin our demo, right, we're going to be in the PowerShell gallery. If I want to look for my actual module, right, I can search for what I'm looking for. In the case of earlier, I was looking for a VMware Power CLI. So if I search for that, right, I can see the module. I can see how many times it's been downloaded, how many have been of a particular version, look at how to install it. If you want to pick a specific version, we can do that. We can also tie this into Azure Automation, and like I said, also download the raw file. But what we need to do here first is look at our API keys, right? If we come in here, we can manage our packages that we already have, manually upload a package if you want, but you can also look at those API keys. In my case, I have one, right? I can create a new one and give it a name. I'll call this one demo. Specify how long you want it to expire in. I'll do this for 1 day so someone doesn't go in there and actually do mine. We also can go ahead and specify this for all package versions, put it for any package or any particular one. In this case, I'll go ahead and put an asterisk to make sure that it has the ability to push any of those packages that are out there. And so we're going to go ahead and click on create, and it's going to show us our API key, right? It can be done. We can go here and copy it. So I'm going to go ahead and bring this over on one of my other screens for safekeeping. So now that we've done that, right, let's look at the actual code that we're going to be reviewing. So here is a module that I created, right? It was a particular need I needed for simple, right? Getting information about a particular cluster, right? Maybe I have a traditional report that a manager needs all the time. The default modules, right? You might do a get cluster. It fills it in a weird format. It might show you certain things, right? You want to be able to pass in stuff and really have it in an automated fashion. And so what I've done here, right, is I've created a function called get VM cluster info, put in the details of that, put in a synopsis of what it does, a description, and the best thing to do is always include an example. So that's when someone does get help, right, the name of your module, you'll be able to do it. In this case, I need to pass in parameters, right? I need to pass in a server, a username, a password, and a cluster. And so you can make those mandatory, you can make those secure, you can do what you want. That's what you're actually passing into here. And so once that's there, they're passed into variables. And so from here, I'm going to run a connect to the iServer with the credentials that were provided. I'm going to output it to null because you don't care if the certificate's invalid or something like that, right? We want it to be just hidden. Next thing we're going to do is gather the information about the cluster that we passed. But in this case, I also want to do some reporting on the actual hosts. And so what I'm actually doing here is getting the information about the cluster, right? The name, some other settings. Maybe I want to know if it's HA enabled or DRS enabled. But I was also curious about overall capacity, right? How much memory do we have used? How much memory do we have available? How much CPU do we have and how much CPU do we have available, right? Not something that we normally see, but we can. But one of my favorite things to do is it's just very easy to format, right? We take all of those results, we create a PowerShell custom object, an array, and then I'm going to pass in the cluster name. How many hosts are in that cluster? How much available CPU in megahertz? What is the used CPU in megahertz? And then what is the available memory and what is the used memory, right? These are all standard stuff, but it normally does it in these really long numbers, right? In this case, I have the ability to round them to the nearest two decimal point, add them up all together, make it very easy. I don't have to go to an Excel spreadsheet and do that. And then I'm going to output that result. And I've done that here in a function. And if I wanted to, right, I could save this as a PS1 file and run it as often as I want. But one of my favorite things to do with code is share it. If I've done this, maybe someone wants it too. Maybe I need to run this regularly, or I need to transfer from one machine to another, or I need to share it with a peer, right? Sharing is caring. Go ahead and do that. Once you write that function, right, the number one thing we can do is test it. And so, like I said, if we do a get module, things may not show up. When you're developing this locally, you still need to do an import module. And so we're going to do this and point it to our file. If this is the very first time, right, you may not actually have to do this. But what I've learned over time is I always need to pass in a force because sometimes it was preloaded as I've been doing some updates. There was a previous error, maybe it wasn't loaded, right? You're going to import that module. You do get module, right? We can see that it is here because I've actually imported it, right? It's not going to be run on demand yet. So once we have that there, then we can go ahead and actually test our commandlet, right? I'm going to get the VM cluster info attached to our vCenter, pass in a cluster name, and pass in a username and password, right? Many ways to do this. We can create secure credential files. I cannot make username password mandatory and go through there. A lot of different ways. Again, just an example. And so once we run that, right, it's going to go connect to that cluster and find out all those details. So now I've done this very quick commandlet that gets the cluster name. I have 3 hosts. I have 124,000 megahertz in this cluster. But great thing, I'm only using 30,000. So I still am only using a quarter of my CPU available. Kind of easy for planning. Well, what happened? In this cluster, I have 768 gigs of memory, right? I can round that up to the nearest number because we know it's probably not 0.87. But when you add all that up, it actually was like 8 decimals long. And so I just wanted to make it simple. And then we can also look at out of that 768, what is actually used, right? 277. So it's a great way to actually report. And so now that we've done this, right, we can go ahead and specify that information, right? So we talked about the first step, right, is actually building the module. Find something you need to do and write the code. The next part is going to be writing the manifest. And so I have originally done one, right? I already published this and I want to kind of go through an update. In this module, we're going to publish the demo module Code Connect 2021. The version, I believe, was 1.0. We can go to 1.1. And again, as you do your testing, you're going to test it against compatible PowerShell editions. Does it only work on PowerShell desktop on Windows? Does it also work on PowerShell Core, right? Linux, Mac, etc. You can then specify that GUID, right? It's going to be automatically generated, so you don't have to specifically pass that. You're going to specify the author, again, your company name, your copyright, your description. In this case, since I'm using PowerShell Core, right, I had to specify a minimum PowerShell version. You need to be on at least 5.1. You can also pass in all these other variables, right? They're just commented out because they're not needed to be there. Again, functions to export. In this case, I only have one function, so I only need to specify one function to export. Aliases, if we had those, and then any of that private data. In this case, again, I didn't put that release notes. I didn't put in that icon URI. This is a demo, so I'm not going to be putting all that information, but a best practice is you do want to include all of that. And so again, nothing really here to update. I'm just going to kind of show how we can increment that. And so one of my favorite things to do, and I've learned this from a few people, is by utilizing PowerShell splatting. And what that pretty much means is that you are going to take a set of content And instead of saying each individual thing, passing those in as a sub, you can go ahead and do an at symbol with an open bracket, put in all those details. And so in this case, the module settings are going to be the module, or the compatible editions, the minimum version, and all those details. Once I've done that, it's created this. And so if we look at module settings, right, it's all there. Oops, it's going to be dollar, right? All those settings are stored there. I can go ahead and pass it. And so the next things we need to do are we need to go ahead and update it, right? Update the module manifest to show the latest settings. So I'm going to go ahead here and do my update module manifest, pass in those module settings, and specify the path. And so in this case, it did not work. We can go ahead and clear that out. And we can go ahead and do a new module manifest, right? Say this was the very first one that we did. We can go ahead and create that module manifest and it'll output those files, right? I close this out. I'm not going to save it. And we reopen it, right? Nope, it didn't go ahead and specify that new version, right? Actually, it did. We did 2.1. But say we wanted to increment it, right? Say we wanted to update that module and we had a version 2.2. Well, I can go here and do that update module manifest, specify the path, put in the version, and when I come here, reopen the file, we've incremented that version. So now we've built our module. We've built our manifest. The next step is publish it. It's going to be a very simple task. From here, what we're going to do is we are going to do that publish module, specify the path. So here I have it in a folder. Again, I've created this API key that's only good for one day, and we hit enter. Only takes a few moments, but once that is done, it's going to go ahead and push that update to the PowerShell gallery. So what I'm going to do here is we're going to come back and install it, is I'm going to refresh my PowerShell session and make sure that we don't have anything installed. What I can do here now is go back to the packages and I can search for my demo. So let's search for Code Connect. Hopefully there's not out there, right? Ooh, nice little flag. It says it's mine. So we can see this is the demo that it was created. If we select it, we can see all those details. Decide what is the current version, right? I haven't published the other ones, but we can go ahead and publish and use the latest versions. So we want to install it. Let's copy it. I'm going to come back to my session here and paste that. I'm going to go ahead and install that module. And tell us, hey, you're downloading from the PowerShell gallery. Are you sure you want to do that? We do a get module dash list available. Probably going to be a few here, but let's catch the one that I did. If we go up and look here at the top, it's going to be my script one, version 2.2, demo module, code connect 2021, record on desktop, and here is my function. I have a bunch of other stuff loaded, but that's the one that we care about. So now, if we go back in there, and I'm going to run my, nope, that's not it. So now if I go back in, so now if I go back in and run my command, right, I'm going to do get VM cluster info, specify my server, specify my user, the password, and then the cluster name. It's going to run it. We've done our command. Very simple. We've shared this. You can go out and play with this and use it. So with that, let's go back to the presentation. Well, that was fun, right? Successful demo. We learned how to publish it, build it, do all that stuff, make some updates. So definitely want to say thank you for your time. Don't forget to take the survey. Really appreciate the feedback and see if this is something you want to see, what else you're interested in. And with that, Like I said, my name was David Saman, and thank you very much for listening to this presentation.